The great chamber of Nexus Prime had stood for 10,000 years, and in all that time, it had never known silence quite like this one. 12 species sat in the circular hall, their representatives arranged in ascending tiers of crystal and light. And every single one of them stared at the holographic image floating in the center of the room, a small blue planet called Earth. Ambassador Thelvok of the Zerathi Dominion rose from his seat. His forearms spread wide in the traditional gesture of absolute certainty, and his voice echoed through the chamber like thunder rolling across an empty sky. "We have watched them for 300 cycles," he declared, his scales shimmering under the pale light of a dozen alien suns. "And in that time, they have spread from one world to 47 colonies across 3 star systems." Murmurs rippled through the assembly, a sound like wind through tall grass, and Thelvok waited for silence before he continued. "They breed faster than any species in recorded history, and they adapt to environments that would kill most of us within hours. They live on frozen moons and burning deserts and planets, with atmospheres that would melt our lungs. And they do not merely survive there, they thrive." The Kovathi delegate, a towering figure wrapped in ceremonial robes of deep purple, leaned forward with concern written across his ancient face. "What do you propose, Ambassador? Surely you are not suggesting what I think you are suggesting." Thelvok turned to face the old Kovathi, and his expression held no mercy and no doubt. "I am proposing exactly what you think I am proposing. Eldemarth, I am proposing that we end the human problem before it becomes a human catastrophe." The chamber erupted in chaos, voices rising and falling like waves crashing against stone, and it took several minutes for the Arbiter to restore order with sharp commands and flashing lights. When quiet returned, the Meldrani representative spoke in her soft musical voice that somehow carried to every corner of the vast room. "You speak of war, Ambassador Thelvok, but war against whom exactly? These humans have never attacked us, never threatened us, never even spoken to us with anything but curiosity and friendliness." "That is precisely the problem," Thelvok replied, and his voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. "They smile and wave and send us messages of peace while they spread across the galaxy, like a plague of locusts in another 100 cycles. They will outnumber us all combined, and what then?" He gestured to the holographic display, and the image shifted to show human colonies spreading across a star map like drops of water soaking into fabric. "They are not warriors yet, but they will become warriors when they need to be. They are not conquerors yet, but they will become conquerors when they choose to be. We must act now while we still can." The vote came 3 hours later, after debate that ranged from passionate defense of the humans to terrified agreement with Thelvok. And when the final count was announced, not a single voice had spoken against the motion. War was declared. High Commander Kethris of the Combined Fleet received his orders within the hour, and he studied the tactical data with the careful attention of a predator examining wounded prey. The humans had no faster-than-light weapons, no planetary shields capable of stopping orbital bombardment, no psychic warriors to disrupt enemy formations, and no antimatter reserves worth mentioning. Their entire fleet consisted of maybe 2,000 ships, most of them converted cargo vessels with weapons bolted to their hulls. "This will not be a war," Kethris told his officers with a sound that might have been laughter. "This will be a harvest 30 rotations at most, and we will be celebrating our victory on the ashes of their homeworld." His officers cheered, their confidence absolute and their hearts full of the glory that awaited them. On Earth, the news arrived at 3 in the morning, transmitted via quantum burst from a human listening post near the border. And within minutes, every leader on the planet was awake and reading the same terrible words. The United Terran government convened an emergency session, their faces pale and their hands trembling as military advisors presented projection after projection, each one worse than the last. "We cannot win a conventional war," General Morrison announced, his voice heavy with the weight of impossible odds. Their fleet outnumbers ours 5-1. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours. And they have 12 species working together while we stand alone. President Okonkwo sat at the head of the table, her dark eyes scanning the room full of frightened faces, and she spoke with a calm that seemed almost impossible under the circumstances. So we do not fight a conventional war. What alternatives do we have? Silence fell across the room, thick and suffocating, until a silver-haired woman at the far end of the table stood up and cleared her throat. Admiral Chun Wei-Lin had served in the Terran Navy for 40 years, and she had spent the last 20 of those years preparing for this exact moment, not because she wanted war, but because she knew it would come eventually. We do not fight conventionally, she said, and her voice carried the absolute certainty of someone who had already won a battle that had not yet begun. The president leaned forward with hope flickering in her eyes for the first time since the news had arrived. Explain yourself, Admiral. What do you mean? Admiral Chun smiled, and there was something in that smile that made several people in the room shiver despite the warmth of the chamber. The Council thinks they know what humans are capable of because they have studied our ships and our weapons and our colonies, but they have never studied our history. And they have never understood our nature. She walked to the main display and began pulling up files that most people in the room had never seen before. Files marked with classification levels that required special clearance just to know they existed. They expect us to meet them in battle with guns and missiles and bombs. And if we do that, we will lose, but we are not going to do that. Because we have weapons they cannot imagine. Weapons they would never think to look for. Weapons that have kept humanity alive through 10,000 years of trying to destroy ourselves. General Morrison frowned with confusion written across his weathered face. What weapons, Admiral? What could we possibly have that would matter against 10,000 warships? Admiral Chun turned to face him, and her eyes held the fire of someone who had already seen the future. The only weapons that have ever truly mattered. General hope and stubbornness and the absolute refusal to accept that we cannot win. The room fell silent once more, but this silence was different. This silence was not fear, but the first stirring of something that felt almost like belief. The Council had declared war on humanity. They had no idea what they had just awakened. The Armada arrived at New Helsinki on the 14th day of the campaign. 10,000 warships blocking out the stars like a curtain of death drawn across the sky. Commander Vethkai stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Blade, and he studied the small human colony below with something close to disappointment. He had expected resistance. Defiance, perhaps even a desperate last stand that would give his warriors something to remember. Instead, he found empty streets and silent buildings and a single human shuttle floating in orbit like a leaf waiting to fall. Scan the colony again, Vethkai ordered, his voice sharp with suspicion. There must be something we are missing. His sensors officer worked frantically at his console before turning back with confusion written across his face. The colony is completely evacuated. Commander, every human is gone. Every ship has departed. There is nothing left but empty structures and abandoned equipment. Vethkai's claws tightened on the armrest of his chair with frustration, and he was about to order the fleet to move on when a transmission came through from the human shuttle. "Attention, Council Fleet," a cheerful voice announced in perfect Zirathi. "My name is Marcus Cole, and I am the official diplomatic representative of the United Terran government. I would very much like to welcome you to our territory." The bridge crew exchanged confused glances, and Vethkai felt something cold crawl up his spine despite his best efforts to ignore it. "You wish to surrender?" he asked, and he could not quite keep the uncertainty from his voice. "Oh no," Marcus replied with what sounded like genuine amusement. "I am simply here to greet you. It seemed rude to let you come all this way without someone to say hello." Vethkai's confusion deepened, and he found himself responding almost against his will. You understand that we have come to destroy your species. Human, we have declared war against your people, and we will not stop until every one of you is dead. A long pause followed, and when Marcus spoke again, his voice was softer and somehow sadder. Yes, I understand. I want you to know that we forgive you for that. The transmission ended before Vethkai could respond, and he watched in stunned silence as the human shuttle turned and flew away at maximum speed, disappearing into the darkness between stars. What was that about? His second officer asked with fear beginning to show in his eyes. Vethkai had no answer. The fleet continued toward Earth, following the planned route through human space. And at first, everything seemed to proceed according to schedule, but then strange things began to happen. A supply convoy of 30 ships failed to arrive at the designated rendezvous point, and when search parties were sent to find them, they discovered nothing but empty space where the convoy should have been. No wreckage, no debris, no distress signals, just emptiness, as if the ships had never existed at all. 3 days later, another group vanished, and then another, and then another, until the total losses reached 400 ships without a single shot being fired. High Commander Kethris received the reports with growing unease, and he ordered double patrols and constant vigilance, but the disappearances continued despite every precaution. It is impossible, his intelligence officer insisted with desperation creeping into her voice. Humans do not have the technology to destroy our ships without leaving any evidence. They do not have cloaking devices or weapons powerful enough to vaporize entire vessels. Then explain what is happening, Kethris demanded. She could not. The navigation problems started soon after. Small errors at first that seemed like simple malfunctions. But they grew worse with each passing day until entire squadrons found themselves hundreds of light years from where they should have been. The computers are fine, the chief engineer reported with frustration. Every diagnostic comes back clean, but the coordinates keep shifting as if someone is rewriting them from inside the system. And then came the dreams. Soldiers across the fleet began reporting the same nightmare human children standing in darkness, asking questions in soft voices that somehow echoed through the mind long after waking. Why are you coming to hurt us? The children would ask with tears streaming down their faces. What did we do wrong? They would whisper with voices that broke hearts. Do you have children too? They would wonder with innocent curiosity that cut deeper than any blade. Morale began to crumble like sandcastles facing the tide, and soldiers who had laughed at the idea of fighting humans now flinched at every shadow and jumped at every unexpected sound. Vethkai watched his crew grow pale and nervous, their confidence draining away like water through a broken vessel, and he felt the same fear gnawing at his own heart despite his best efforts to remain strong. This is psychological warfare, he announced to his officers with certainty he did not feel. The humans are trying to break our spirits before we reach their homeworld. We must not let them succeed. His words sounded hollow even to his own ears. By the time the Armada entered the Sol system, they had lost 400 ships to unknown causes, another 200 to navigation errors that sent them into asteroid fields and unstable stars, and countless soldiers to desertion and madness and suicide. The fleet that had left Nexus Prime with 10,000 proud warships now numbered barely 9,000, and every remaining crew member carried the weight of fear in their hearts. High Commander Kethris stood on his bridge and stared at the pale blue dot that was Earth. And for the first time since the campaign began, he wondered if perhaps they had made a terrible mistake. What kind of species fights like this? His second officer whispered with something close to awe in her voice. I do not know, Kethris admitted, and the words tasted like ash in his mouth. Somewhere in the darkness of space, Marcus Cole sat in a small observation room and watched the Council fleet approach on his screens. And he smiled with satisfaction. "Phase 1 complete," he reported to Admiral Chun via secure channel. "They are scared and confused, and they have not even seen our real weapons yet." Admiral Chun's voice came back steady and calm. "Good, let them come a little closer before we show them what we are truly capable of." The humans had not fired a single shot, and already they were winning. The Council had expected war. They had found something far worse. They had found an enemy who understood them better than they understood themselves, and that understanding was more terrifying than any weapon ever built. The assault on Earth's orbital defense stations began at dawn on the 42nd day of the war, and High Commander Kethris watched from his flagship as wave after wave of Council fighters swarmed the human positions. The stations fell quickly, far more quickly than his tactical officers had predicted, and Kethris felt suspicion gnawing at his mind like a hungry beast. "This is too easy," he muttered, his claws drumming against his chair with nervous energy. "They are giving up their defenses without any real fight." His intelligence officer approached with a confused expression on her face. "Perhaps they have simply accepted the inevitable, Commander. They know they cannot win against our superior numbers." Kethris wanted to believe her, but something in his gut screamed that they were missing something important, something that would change everything. He was right. The first human broadcast reached the Zirathi ships at noon, and it was not a message of surrender or a demand for terms. It was a video of a human child singing a Zirathi lullaby, the same song that mothers had sung to their children for 1,000 generations. The words were perfect, the melody flawless, and the child's eyes sparkled with innocent joy as she performed a song that no human should have known existed. Soldiers across the Zirathi fleet watched in stunned silence, and many of them felt tears streaming down their faces without understanding why. "How do they know our songs?" One young warrior whispered with his voice breaking like thin ice under pressure. Before anyone could answer, another broadcast arrived. This time for the Korvathi vessels, a human orchestra performing the sacred hymns that had been forbidden since the Great Famine 2 centuries ago. Hymns so beautiful that grown soldiers wept openly on their bridges. And then came the messages for the Maldrani, the Vethkai, the Turelian, and every other species in the Council fleet, each one perfectly crafted to touch something deep and precious in their hearts. Something they had forgotten they still carried. "They have studied us," Kethris realized with horror dawning in his eyes. "They know everything about us, our music, our history, our culture, our fears. They have been learning about us for decades while we ignored them as primitives." His second officer stared at him with terror written across her face. "What does it mean, Commander? What are they planning?" Kethris had no answer, but the answer came soon enough. Human guerrilla forces activated across every occupied colony. Small groups of fighters who emerged from hidden bunkers and secret tunnels to strike at Council supply lines and communication networks. They did not fight to win. They fought to survive, to endure, to make every victory cost more than it was worth. When Council forces destroyed one cell, 2 more appeared in its place, and when they captured human fighters, the prisoners smiled and forgave their captors and asked about their families with genuine curiosity. "Why do you not hate us?" a Zirathi interrogator demanded of a captured human soldier. The human just shrugged with a peaceful expression on his face. "What would be the point of that hatred only hurts the person who carries it, and we have more important things to do than hurt ourselves." The interrogator walked away more disturbed than he had ever been in his entire career. And then humanity revealed its greatest secret. Admiral Chun Wei-Lin appeared on every screen in the Council fleet, her silver hair gleaming under the lights of her bridge. And she spoke with the calm authority of someone holding cards that no one else could see. "You came to destroy Earth because you thought Earth was humanity," she announced with a smile that held no fear. "But Earth is just a planet, humanity is an idea, and ideas cannot be killed. The screen shifted to show star maps covered with blinking lights, thousands upon thousands of them scattered across the galaxy in every direction. For 50 years, we have been sending ships into the void, not warships, but colony ships, generation ships, seed ships carrying everything needed to start human civilization again on distant worlds you have never heard of. Kethris felt his blood run cold as he stared at the map. Even if you destroy Earth today, even if you hunt down every colony you know about, millions of humans are already beyond your reach. We are everywhere. High Commander, and we will keep spreading until the day the universe dies. The transmission ended, and silence fell across the Council fleet like a funeral shroud. But the worst was yet to come. Private messages began arriving on secure channels across the fleet. Messages containing information that no human should have possessed, secrets that Council leaders had buried for centuries. The Kovathi received proof that their great famine had not been a natural disaster, but a deliberate act of genocide, orchestrated by the Council leadership to crush a rebellion. The Maldrani learned that their lost colonies had not been destroyed by pirates, but sold to slavers by Zirathi, merchants with the full knowledge of the Council government. The Tyrellian discovered that their sacred artifacts had been stolen and hidden by their own representatives to prevent them from unifying against the other species. Every species found something, some terrible truth that their allies had kept from them, and trust that had taken centuries to build began crumbling in hours. They are turning us against each other. Kethris breathed with horrified admiration. His intelligence officer nodded with her face pale as death. They have had agents in our governments for decades. Commander, they've been gathering secrets and waiting for the right moment to use them. This is not warfare, Kethris whispered. No, his officer agreed. This is something far more dangerous. This is humanity showing us who we really are. Across the fleet, soldiers began questioning their orders, their leaders, their entire understanding of the war they were fighting. The Council had attacked humanity with ships and weapons and overwhelming force. Humanity had responded with truth and empathy, and a mirror that showed the Council its own ugly reflection. And the Council was losing. The Kovathi fleet turned its guns on the Zirathi flagship at exactly midnight, and the war that had been meant to destroy humanity became something far more terrible. Elder Morith stood on his bridge with fury burning in his ancient eyes, and his voice thundered across every frequency. For 200 years, we believed our people died from natural causes. For 200 years. We mourned and prayed and blamed ourselves for failing to save them, and now we learn that it was you, our allies, who poisoned our crops and contaminated our water and watched as millions starved. The Zirathi commander tried to respond, tried to explain that it had been a different government in a different time, but his words were drowned out by the roar of Kovathi weapons. Civil war erupted across the Council fleet like wildfire spreading through dry grass. The Maldrani, enraged by the truth about their lost colonies, joined the Kovathi assault and targeted any vessel flying Zirathi colors. The Tyrellian, betrayed by everyone they had trusted, withdrew from the battle entirely and began a long, silent journey home. 3 smaller species, the Vethkai, the Maruni, and the Keleth, defected to humanity's side completely, their commanders weeping with shame as they surrendered to human forces who treated them with kindness instead of contempt. "We are sorry," the Vethkai commander said through her tears. "We did not know what our leaders had done. We did not know what we were fighting for." Admiral Chun's response came back warm and gentle. "We know, that is why we showed you the truth, so you can make your own choice." High Commander Kethris watched his Grand Alliance tear itself apart, and he felt something like despair settling into his bones. He had brought 10,000 ships to destroy a defenseless species, and now barely 4,000 remained loyal to his command. The rest were either fighting each other or fleeing toward home or surrendering to the very enemies they had come to conquer. We can still win, his second officer insisted with desperation in her voice. If we strike at Earth now, while they are distracted, we can end this before it gets any worse. Kethers knew it was madness, but he also knew it was his only chance. All loyal ships, form attack formation, he ordered through gritted teeth. We end this today. The remnant of the Council fleet 4,000 warships, carrying soldiers who had seen too much and understood too little, surged toward Earth with weapons hot and shields raised. They broke through the human defensive line with surprising ease, leaving burning wreckage in their wake, and for a moment, it seemed like victory might still be possible. But then a single ship emerged from behind Earth's moon, a vessel unlike anything the Council had ever seen. It was not large, barely bigger than a heavy cruiser, but it carried itself with a presence that made even the mightiest battleships seem small. The name painted on its hull gleamed in the light of distant stars. Unconquered. Admiral Chen Wei-Lin stood on her bridge, surrounded by officers who had trained their entire lives for this moment. And she smiled with the peaceful confidence of someone who had already won. "Attention, Council Fleet," she broadcast on all frequencies. "This is Admiral Chen Wei-Lin of the Terran Navy. You have come a very long way to die, but I am offering you a chance to live instead." Kethras laughed with bitter disbelief. "You offer us terms when we have 4,000 ships, and you have one. You are either insane or incredibly arrogant, Admiral." "Neither," Chen replied with calm certainty. "I am simply human. And humans have learned something that your species never understood. We have learned that true victory does not come from destroying our enemies, but from transforming them into friends." "You speak in riddles," Kethris snarled. "Then let me speak plainly," Chen answered, and her voice hardened like steel cooling in ice water. "You came to destroy us because you feared what we might become. You were right to fear, but you misunderstood what to fear." She paused, and when she continued, her words carried the weight of absolute truth. "We are not warriors. High Commander, we are survivors. We are the species that lived through ice ages and plagues and wars that killed millions of our own kind. And we kept going because we refused to accept that survival was not possible." Her eyes blazed with something that looked almost like fire. "We are dreamers. We are the species that looked at the void between stars and said, 'Let us see what is out there,' even though every rational calculation said we should stay home and be safe. You cannot kill that, High Commander. You can only join it or be forgotten by history." Silence fell across the battlefield, and even the chaos of the Civil War seemed to pause as everyone listened. "I am offering you complete ceasefire," Chen continued. "War crimes tribunals for leadership. Only every soldier who surrenders will be sent home to their families. And every species that joins us will have a place in the new order we are building." Kethras wanted to refuse, wanted to order the final attack that would destroy Earth, even if it cost him everything. But before he could speak, his own crew began to move. "Enough," his weapons officer announced with exhaustion in every syllable. "We have seen enough death, and enough destruction, and enough madness. We want to go home." Other voices joined hers, spreading across the bridge like ripples in still water, until Kethras stood alone against the tide of his own soldiers. "You would mutiny?" he asked with disbelief. "We would survive," his second officer replied, and her eyes held no apology. "The humans taught us that survival matters more than pride. Perhaps it is time we listened." Kethras looked around at the faces of soldiers he had led for years, soldiers who had trusted him and followed him and believed in him, and he saw something he had never expected to see. He saw hope. Not hope for victory, but hope for something better, hope for an end to endless war. Hope for a future that did not demand constant sacrifice. Hope for a galaxy that might finally know peace. Slowly feeling as if he were moving through deep water, High Commander Kethras lowered his head and gave the order he had never imagined giving. "Stand down, all ships, stand down, we surrender." The war was over. Humanity had won without firing a shot. 5 years had passed since the war ended, and the galaxy had become something that no one could have imagined. The crystalline chambers of Nexus Prime, the same halls where 12 species had once voted to destroy humanity, now echoed with the sounds of 100 different languages united in purpose. Secretary General Marcus Cole stood at the central podium, his hair gray at the temples now, but his smile as warm as it had been on the day he welcomed the Council fleet to New Helsinki. Distinguished delegates, he announced with joy ringing in every word. Welcome to the first full session of the Terran Concordat today. We begin writing a new chapter in the history of our galaxy. The assembled representatives, human and alien, alike rose to their feet in thunderous applause that shook the ancient walls. The Galactic Council had dissolved within months of the war's end, its authority shattered by the secrets humanity had revealed and the trust that could never be rebuilt. In its place stood the Terran Concordat, not an empire but a network, not a government but a partnership of equals working together toward a future none of them could build alone. Human diplomats served on every world, not as rulers, but as mediators who helped species that had hated each other for centuries find common ground. Human teachers worked alongside alien scholars, sharing knowledge and learning in return, building understanding that grew stronger with each passing day. Human artists collaborated with Korvati singers and Meldrani sculptors and Vethkai poets, creating works of beauty that blended traditions from across the stars. Elder Morth of the Korvati, his robes now bearing the silver threads of the Concordat alongside his traditional purple, spoke to the assembly with tears glistening in his ancient eyes. 5 years ago, I led my fleet against the Zerethi in a rage fueled by centuries of hidden pain. I thought revenge would heal the wounds that had festered in my people's hearts. He paused, and his voice softened to something almost like wonder. I was wrong. Healing came not from vengeance, but from truth. Not from destruction, but from understanding. The humans taught us that, and we will never forget. The Zerethi representative, a young female named Selaveth, who had replaced the old corrupt leadership, rose to respond. My people carry great shame for what our ancestors did. But the humans have shown us that shame need not be a prison. They have shown us that the past can be acknowledged without being repeated. That wrongs can be admitted without demanding eternal punishment. She looked across the chamber at Elder Morth with something like hope in her eyes. The Korvathi and the Zerethi have begun joint projects to restore what was lost, to rebuild what was destroyed, to create something new from the ashes of old hatred. This would not have been possible without humanity's guidance. Former High Commander Kethras sat in the gallery, watching the proceedings with an expression that had taken years to understand. He was a free citizen now, his war crimes judged, but not punished with death or imprisonment. The humans had given him something he had never expected, the chance to learn from his mistakes. He lived in a small apartment on Earth, taught Zerethi military history to human students who wanted to understand rather than condemn, and spent his evenings in therapy sessions that slowly untangled the knots of hatred and fear that had driven him his entire life. The young humans in his classes asked questions he had never considered, not about tactics or weapons or how to win, but about why wars started and how they could be prevented and what it felt like to order the deaths of millions. At first, their curiosity had seemed naive, even foolish. Now he understood that it was the wisest thing he had ever encountered. They do not want to forget the past, he had told his therapist just last week. They want to remember it so clearly that they never repeat it. His therapist, a gentlewoman named Dr. Sarah Chun, who was somehow related to the famous admiral, had smiled at his words. That is what we call hope, Commander. The belief that tomorrow can be better than yesterday if we work hard enough to make it so. Kethras had not fully understood, but he was beginning to. On Earth, Admiral Chen Weilin sat in her garden with her grandchildren playing at her feet. watching the Concordat assembly on her personal display with quiet satisfaction. A reporter had come to interview her, asking the same question that everyone wanted answered. "Admiral Chun, the whole galaxy wants to know what was humanity's greatest weapon, the one that defeated the Council without a single battle?" She had thought about the question for a long moment, watching her grandchildren chase each other through the flowers, hearing their laughter ring out like bells in the morning air. "The same thing it has always been," she finally answered, and her voice held the weight of absolute certainty. Hope and the stubbornness to keep believing in it when everything says we should not. The reporter had frowned with confusion. "But how is hope a weapon, Admiral?" Chun had smiled with patience earned through decades of experience. "Because hope is contagious. When we showed the Council species that they could be better than their history, that they could choose a different path, that they did not have to keep fighting the same wars forever, they believed us." Her eyes had drifted upward to the sky, where ships of a dozen species crossed the stars together. "They believed us because we believed first. That is the secret the Council never understood, and that is why they lost." Above the garden, a Kovathi transport flew alongside a Meldrani cruiser and a human freighter, heading toward the new joint colony at Nexus 7. Children of three species would grow up together there, playing the same games and learning the same lessons and dreaming the same dreams. They would never know a galaxy at war. They would never understand why their grandparents had feared each other. They would only know that different did not mean dangerous, that strange did not mean evil, that the universe was vast enough for everyone who wanted to explore it. And that was humanity's greatest victory. Not the war they had won, but the peace they had built. The galaxy had tried to destroy humanity. Instead, humanity had handed the galaxy a mirror and invited everyone to build something better. And the galaxy, to its own amazement, had accepted. The stars were no longer divided by borders and hatred and ancient grudges. They were united by something far more powerful. They were united by hope. And hope, as humanity had always known, was the one weapon that could never be defeated.